Don't just listen tonight. Transform. The inner circle is where that happens. First link in the description. Welcome back, fellow Jungians, to Jung at Night. Tonight, we're entering one of the most tender, most necessary spaces in the human heart. The place where self-love, letting go, and the long journey home to yourself all meet. The question that lives quietly in so many of us, especially in the late hours when the noise of the day finally goes still. Why is it so easy to love everyone else and so impossibly hard to love myself? But before we begin, let me remind you of something important. You're not here to take notes. You're not here to solve anything tonight. You're here to rest. To let Jung's wisdom on self-love, letting go, and coming home to yourself dissolve into your unconscious while you drift into the peace you've been searching for. So go ahead, let your body sink deeper into the bed. Feel the weight of your head against the pillow. Notice your breathing slowing, your muscles releasing the tension they've been holding all day. There's nothing you need to fix right now, nothing you need to become tonight. You are simply here, listening, letting go. I must mention a word for those of you who are ready for more than tonight. Inside the inner circle, members are breaking patterns they carried for decades, waking up differently, finally accessing the self-love they stopped believing was possible. Daily prompts, deep meditations, a community of people doing this exact work alongside you. If that is what you came here for, the link is in the description. Now let us begin. As we move through the psychology of self-abandonment, the patterns of giving too much, the art of genuine letting go, and the quiet, extraordinary journey of coming home to who you truly are. Just let it wash over you, like a gentle tide, carrying away what no longer serves you. You don't have to remember any of this. Your soul already knows the way home. Jung believed that true transformation happens not through effort, but through awareness, meeting surrender. And tonight, that's exactly what we're offering you. Awareness wrapped in rest, healing woven into sleep. So close your eyes if they're not already closed. Let the world outside fade to nothing. And let me ask you something that might change everything. Have you ever felt this? You pour your heart, your time, your energy, sometimes your entire sense of self into other people, into relationships, into roles, into the endless work of being who everyone around you needs you to be. And somewhere in all of that giving, you lose the thread back to yourself. You can no longer remember what you actually want, what genuinely brings you alive, what it feels like to be in your own company without immediately filling the space with something, anything, that keeps you from having to face the particular quiet of being alone with yourself. Carl Jung pointed out something that few people dare to say directly. The inability to love yourself is not a character flaw. It is a wound. A wound that was formed early, in rooms you may not remember clearly, in the accumulated experience of learning that your worth was something to be earned rather than something you simply had. And from that wound, a particular way of moving through the world developed, always giving more than you receive, always accommodating more than you ask to be accommodated, always finding it easier to meet everyone else's needs than to acknowledge your own, and calling all of that love, when very often it is something else entirely. It is the wound wearing love's clothing. In today's video, we will explore why when you truly love yourself, not in words, but in the quiet daily practice of staying with yourself, everything changes. The relationships you enter, the ones you leave, the way you hold your own grief, the way you let go of what was never truly yours to keep, and the extraordinary experience of coming home to a self that has been waiting with more patience than you can imagine for exactly this moment. Stay until the end, because the love you've been searching for has never been as far away as it seemed. It has been here all along, waiting for you to turn toward it. Number 1. Why you give so much and still feel so empty. You think you're loving, and in many ways you are. But look more closely at what the loving costs you. How many times have you said yes when every part of you wanted to say no? How many times have you swallowed what you actually felt to keep the peace? How many times have you made yourself smaller, quieter, less inconvenient, less needy, less real, in order to maintain a connection that required you to be a more manageable version of yourself? And how many times, after all of that giving, after all of that accommodating and adjusting and making yourself fit, have you still felt empty, still felt unseen, still felt like something essential was missing, even though you were doing everything right? That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern, and it has a very specific psychological explanation. Carl Jung said that you don't attract what you want, you attract what you are in the depths of your unconscious, where fears, buried wounds, and the beliefs you absorbed before you had the language to question them are still quietly running the show. And one of the most powerful of those buried beliefs, the one that underlies the pattern of giving too much and receiving too little, sounds something like this: I am not enough to be loved as I actually am. I have to earn it. I have to be useful enough, good enough, available enough, easy enough. And if I ask for too much, or show too much, or need too much, the love will go away. That belief was not chosen. It was formed in the specific emotional climate of your earliest rooms. In the particular way love was given, and sometimes withdrawn in the relationships that shaped you before you had any say in what they were teaching you. And from that belief, a whole way of being in the world developed. The way of the person who gives more than they receive, who is always the one who tries harder, who is always the one who loves more, who has learned, through 1,000 small experiences, that their needs are inconvenient and their worth is conditional, and the safest thing is to keep making themselves useful so the love does not disappear. I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Sarah. She was someone everyone described as warm, generous, endlessly available. If you needed anything, Sarah was there. She remembered birthdays, showed up in crises, held space for everyone's grief. She was, by any external measure, one of the most loving people anyone knew. But late at night, in the quiet after everyone had gone home and the roles had been set aside, she felt a particular kind of empty that she could never quite name. Not sad exactly, not lonely in any obvious way. Just hollow, like a house that everyone came to and no one lived in. She gave and gave and gave and still felt somehow unseen, still felt like the most essential part of her had never quite been in the room. When Sarah began doing genuine interior work, she discovered something that surprised her. She was not giving from abundance. She was giving from fear, not consciously, not deliberately, but from the deep, largely unconscious belief that if she stopped being useful, if she stopped being the one who showed up and held things together and asked for nothing in return, the love would disappear. Because that was what the earliest rooms had taught her. That love was transactional, that it flowed toward you when you were performing the right version of yourself and withdrew when you were not. And so she had spent her entire adult life in a kind of continuous performance, generous, warm, endlessly available, and profoundly, invisibly alone. Jung called this identification with the wound, when you haven't separated your true self from the part of you that's been hurt. Instead of healing it, you seek someone to carry it for you, to love you enough to make you forget your insecurities. But no one can do that. And so you keep being disappointed, you keep hurting, you keep giving more, hoping that if you give enough, something will finally fill the place inside that has always felt like not enough. The cruel paradox is that the more you give from that place of lack, the more empty you feel, because giving from lack is not love, it is bargaining. You are not truly offering yourself. You are offering a performance of yourself in exchange for the reassurance that you are acceptable, that you are enough, that the love will stay. And every time that reassurance comes, it lasts only a moment before the hollow feeling returns. Because reassurance from the outside can never reach the place inside where the wound actually lives. If you recognize yourself in Sarah's story, If you have ever given so much that you lost yourself somewhere in the giving, leave a comment below to let me know that what I'm saying has touched you, because you are not alone in this. And the fact that you are here, listening, at whatever hour this is for you, tells me that something in you is already beginning to understand that the giving has to start with yourself, not instead of others, but before. Always before. Real self-love is not selfish. It is the foundation, the ground beneath everything else. Without it, every relationship you enter is a reaching, a searching, a hoping that this time the other person will finally give you what you have never quite learned to give yourself. And that searching will go on, in different relationships, with different people, in different circumstances, until the day you finally turn toward the interior, toward the wound, toward the self that has been waiting, and begin, for the first time, to love it as it actually is, rather than as it would need to be in order to deserve love. That is where the journey begins. Not with the perfect relationship, not with the perfect version of yourself, but with the willingness to stay, to be here, with what is actually present, with the full and complicated and genuinely worthwhile reality of who you are, right now, exactly as you are, without needing to earn it, without needing to be better first. You are already enough. And tonight, slowly, we are going to begin to feel what that actually means. Number 2, the mask you wore to survive and what it cost you. Once you begin to understand that the emptiness is not about finding the right person or giving more or trying harder, a deeper question begins to form. If this pattern is not about love exactly, then what is it about? What is actually operating underneath the giving and the accommodating and the endless making yourself acceptable? Carl Jung had a very precise answer to that question, and it is one of the most important ideas in all of his work. He called it the persona. The persona is the social mask that every human being builds in order to function in the world, to be accepted, to be safe, to be loved. It is not bad. It is necessary. Without some version of it, we could not navigate the social world at all. The problem arises not when you have a persona, but when you forget you are wearing one. When the mask becomes so familiar, so automatic, so thoroughly integrated into the way you move through every room, that you can no longer feel the difference between the performance and the reality. When the face beneath the mask becomes inaccessible even to yourself. For most people who carry the wound of self-abandonment, the persona was built around a very specific requirement. Be acceptable, be lovable, be the version of yourself that keeps the warmth coming and the withdrawal at bay. And so every quality that felt unacceptable, every need that felt too demanding, every feeling that felt too big or too dark or too inconvenient went into the shadow, into the part of the self that the persona could not accommodate, and the persona itself became increasingly polished, increasingly competent, increasingly the version of you that everyone around you found easiest to love. I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Claire. She was 43 when she first really understood what she had been doing for most of her adult life. From the outside, her life looked full. A career she was respected in, relationships that functioned, a reputation for being warm and reliable, and the kind of person others came to in hard times. She was, as she described it, very good at being fine, at taking whatever was happening in the interior and presenting it to the world in a form that was acceptable, manageable, not too much. But one evening, sitting alone in her apartment, after a long day of being exactly who everyone needed her to be, she felt something she had not expected. Not sadness exactly, something stranger than that. A kind of exhaustion so complete that it went beyond the body. The exhaustion of a person who has been performing for so long that she can no longer remember what it would feel like to simply be without the performance, without the monitoring, without the constant subtle adjustment of herself to the shape of whatever the room required. She described it later as the feeling of meeting a stranger in the mirror. The person looking back was recognizable. She knew her. But she did not know her the way you know someone who has been genuinely present with you. She knew her the way you know a very convincing performance. And the question that arose in that moment, quiet and strange and more important than anything she had thought about in years, was this: who is actually in here? Behind the competence and the warmth and the endless fine, who is the person that all of this was built to protect? Jung wrote, "The persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself, as well as others, think one is." This is not a criticism, it is an observation. The persona is not false, exactly. But it is partial. It is the curated version, the acceptable version, the version that learned through the specific pressures of your specific life, which qualities were safe to show and which ones needed to stay hidden. And when you live entirely inside that curated version for long enough, the parts that stayed hidden do not disappear. They accumulate in the shadow, growing quieter but not smaller, growing less visible but not less present. And eventually they begin to speak, not loudly, through the hollow feeling, through the exhaustion that sleep cannot reach, through the sense that even in your fullest moments, something essential is missing. If you have ever looked in the mirror and felt a distance between the person looking back and the person you know yourself to actually be, leave a comment below, even just a word, even just a single sign that you recognize what is being described here, because that recognition, that moment of seeing the persona for what it is the beginning of everything. The first crack in the wall through which the genuine self can begin, slowly and carefully, to breathe. And once you begin to see the persona clearly, once you understand what it has been protecting and what it has been costing, a natural next question arises. What do I do with the parts that went into the shadow? What do I do with the needs and the feelings and the genuine unedited interior that the persona has been keeping hidden? This is where the work gets both more difficult and more genuinely alive. Because what is in the shadow is not only what is dark, it is also what is most originally yours. If tonight is opening something in you that you do not want to close again, the inner circle is where it continues. Every morning, a new prompt waiting for you. Every week, new meditations going deeper than anything on this channel. People who have been where you are right now and who kept going. The link is in the description. Number 3. The parts of you that went into the shadow and why they matter. Here is something that Jung understood better than almost anyone else who has ever studied the human mind. The shadow is not primarily dark. That is the most common misunderstanding of this idea, and it is worth correcting directly. The shadow is simply everything that was not allowed. Everything that was too much, or too little, or too strange, or too needy, or too intense for the particular emotional container of your early life. And that includes qualities that are genuinely difficult: anger, jealousy, neediness, the capacity for cruelty that every human being carries somewhere in the interior. But it also includes, and this is the part that surprises most people, qualities that are genuinely wonderful: creativity that was dismissed as impractical, ambition that was labeled as unseemly, sensitivity that was called weakness, joy that was too loud, wildness that did not fit, desire that felt dangerous to acknowledge. When you gave all of that to the shadow in order to maintain the persona, you did not lose it. You simply lost access to it. And the giving too much that leaves you feeling empty, the performance of the warm and reliable and endlessly available version of yourself, is in many ways the cost of that lost access. Because the genuine self, the full and unedited and completely real version of you, is not available. It went into the shadow, and what remains to give to the world is the performance. And performances, however polished, however genuinely caring, always feel hollow from the inside, because the person giving them knows, somewhere beneath the performance, that the most real part of themselves was not invited into the room. I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Amy. She grew up in a family where emotional expression was considered weakness, not explicitly, No one ever said feelings are bad. But the message was communicated through the texture of everyday life, the way her mother's face closed when Amy cried, the way her father redirected intense emotion into problem-solving before it had been allowed to simply be felt, the way the atmosphere of the house changed when something uncomfortable surfaced, becoming tight and slightly dangerous in a way that everyone felt and no one named. Amy learned early that the feelings that were too big needed to go somewhere quiet, and so they did. They went into the shadow. As an adult, Amy was known for her calm, her steadiness under pressure, her ability to handle hard things without falling apart. People relied on her for this. They found it reassuring. But in the interior, underneath the steadiness, there was a pressure that had been building for decades. All of the feelings that had never been allowed to simply exist. All of the grief and the anger and the longing and the fear that had been redirected and managed and made quiet for so many years. They were there. They had always been there. They were simply not visible. And then one ordinary afternoon, sitting in a meeting at work where nothing particularly significant was happening, Amy felt something she did not expect. A wave of emotion so complete and so sudden that she had to leave the room to let it pass. She stood in a corridor and cried in a way she had not cried since she was a child. Not about the meeting, not about anything she could name, just the weight of everything that had been waiting, everything the shadow had been holding. Finally, in this completely ordinary moment, insisting on being felt, Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Amy's shadow had been directing her life for decades, through the chronic fatigue that had no clear medical explanation, through the flatness that followed even her best achievements, through the sense that she was always slightly performing herself rather than actually being herself. And in that corridor, crying for reasons she could not immediately explain, the unconscious was finally becoming conscious. The shadow was finally finding a way to the surface, not to destroy her, to free her. The shadow becomes dangerous, not when it is seen, but when it is denied. When the parts of yourself that went into it are kept in the dark indefinitely, they do not stay still. They influence. They leak into the life through the patterns you cannot explain, through the reactions that feel disproportionate, through the attractions that keep leading you to the same kind of person, through the hollowness that follows even your most genuine moments of giving. The shadow keeps speaking. And the way it speaks, when direct expression is not available, is through exactly these symptoms: the emptiness, the exhaustion, the sense that something real is always just out of reach. Bringing the shadow into the light does not mean acting on everything that is in it. It does not mean expressing everything that was suppressed or becoming a person without filters or form. It means acknowledging, seeing what is there, saying to the anger, "I know you are here," to the grief, "I know you are here," to the desire and the wildness and the need and the fear, "I know you are here, you are mine. I am not afraid of you." And in that acknowledgement, something releases. The energy that was being used to keep the shadow contained becomes available for actual living. And the genuine self, the full and complicated and completely real version of you, that includes everything the shadow has been holding, begins to have a little more room to breathe. If you feel that there are parts of you living in the shadow, parts that were too much or not enough, or simply not welcome in the rooms you grew up in, leave a word in the comments. One word that represents something in you that has been waiting to be seen. Because sometimes the most important thing is simply to acknowledge that it is there, that it belongs to you, that you have not forgotten it, even though you have been asked to act as if you have. And once you begin to see what is in the shadow, once you begin to acknowledge the parts of yourself that went into the dark, something else becomes possible. Something that most people who have spent years giving too much and receiving too little have almost stopped believing in. The possibility of genuine self-love, not the performed version, not the affirmations repeated in the mirror, but the real kind. the kind that changes everything from the inside, the kind that Jung considered the most important and most difficult work of a human life. And it is where this journey goes next. Number 4. What self-love actually is and what it is not. Most people, when they hear the words self-love, imagine something soft and uncomplicated. Bubble baths, saying no to things, treating yourself. The kind of self-care that is easy to understand and pleasant to practice, but that does not actually reach the place inside where the wound lives. That version of self-love is not wrong. It is simply incomplete. It is the surface of something that goes much deeper. And if you have been practicing the surface version for years and still feel the hollow feeling, still feel the empty after all the giving, still feel the sense that something essential is missing, it is because the real version of self-love has not yet been reached. The real version is more demanding and more liberating and more genuinely transformative than anything that can be purchased or scheduled. Carl Jung never used the phrase self-love in the way it is commonly used today. But the concept he kept returning to throughout his entire body of work was individuation. The process of becoming genuinely, fully, irreducibly yourself. Not the version shaped by fear. Not the version formed by the wound. Not the managed, adjusted, carefully acceptable version that the persona presents to the world, but the real self, the original nature, the full and complicated and worthwhile human being that arrived before any of the shaping began and that has been waiting in the interior through all the years of the performance for permission to live. Individuation is what real self-love actually is. It is the ongoing, daily, never quite finished practice of returning to the real self, of choosing the genuine response over the acceptable one, of allowing the actual interior to be present rather than the edited version, of treating your own needs, your own feelings, your own genuine responses to the world as information worth attending to rather than inconveniences to be managed before anyone notices them. I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Dana. She had spent most of her adult life practicing the surface version of self-love. She knew all the language. She could tell you about boundaries and self-care and the importance of not giving from an empty cup, but she was still, underneath all of that awareness, giving from an empty cup, still saying yes when she meant no, still monitoring how she was landing in every room she entered, still feeling the hollow feeling after every interaction that required her to be the warm and reliable and endlessly available version of herself. The shift for Dana came not through a new practice or a new framework, but through a single, very small, very ordinary moment. She was in a conversation with a friend who was complaining about something that Dana privately found petty and exhausting. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, instead of generating the warm and patient response that the persona had always produced automatically, she paused. And in that pause, she noticed what was actually present in her interior: a mild irritation, a tiredness, a wish to be somewhere else. And instead of immediately managing those responses into something more acceptable, she allowed herself to simply feel them, privately, without acting on them externally, but genuinely, without the management. It was a tiny moment, invisible from the outside, but from the inside, it felt like the first, genuinely honest thing she had done in years. The first moment the real self had been in the room rather than the performance of it, and from that moment, something shifted, not dramatically, but in the way that real things shift, gradually and from the inside, and in a direction that does not announce itself but that changes everything over time. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And this is what real self-love actually is. Not the bath, not the boundary, not the affirmation, but the privilege of allowing the genuine self to be present in the ordinary moments of an ordinary life. The privilege of noticing what you actually feel before converting it into something more manageable. The privilege of attending to your own interior with the same quality of care and curiosity that you have been giving so freely to everyone else. It sounds simple. It is one of the hardest things a human being can actually do, because it requires something that the wound made dangerous a very long time ago: presence. Genuine, unedited, unmanaged presence in your own interior, staying with what is actually there rather than immediately reaching for something better. Being honest about the irritation and the tiredness and the wish to be somewhere else, rather than generating the acceptable response that keeps everyone comfortable and leaves you hollow. That honesty, practiced in the small moments, day after day, in the ordinary texture of an ordinary life, is what real self-love actually is, and it is what changes everything. Not because it makes you more lovable to others, but because it makes you genuinely present to yourself. And genuine presence in your own interior is the only thing that can ever actually fill the hollow place that all the giving was always trying and always failing to reach. If this resonates with you, if somewhere in these words you are recognizing the difference between the version of self-love you have been practicing and the version Jung is pointing toward, leave a comment below. It can be anything: a feeling, a word, a recognition, because sometimes just naming the recognition is enough to let it begin to do its work. And as this work of genuine self-love begins, as the real self starts to have a little more room in the ordinary moments of your daily life, something else becomes possible. Something that most people think of as loss, but that Jung understood as liberation. The ability to let go, not because you have stopped caring, but because you have cared enough for yourself to finally release what was never truly yours to carry. This is where the journey takes us next, into the territory of genuine letting go, and what it actually means to release what you have been holding long past the time it was yours to hold. Let your breathing slow a little more now. Let each exhale carry something with it, some small piece of the tension that has been sitting in the body since before you even noticed it was there. You don't have to know what it is. You don't have to name it or understand it or do anything with it at all. Just let it go with the breath, out and away, into the dark, into the quiet that is beginning to deepen around you as this night settles into itself. You are safe here. You are held here. And what we are moving into now is the territory that most people spend their entire lives circling around but never quite entering. The territory of genuine letting go. Not the kind you perform when you want to seem like someone who has healed, but the real kind. The kind that happens in the interior, in the quiet, in the place where the holding has been happening all this time without your full conscious awareness of it. Because you have been holding a great deal, more than you probably realize. And not just the obvious things, not just the relationships that ended badly, or the losses that were clearly marked as losses, but the subtler things too. The versions of yourself you tried to be and couldn't sustain. The expectations you absorbed before you were old enough to question whether they actually belonged to you. The image of how your life was supposed to look by now. The grief of the unlived life that sits quietly underneath the managed surface of the life you are actually living. You have been holding all of that with remarkable faithfulness, and the holding has cost you something that you may not have fully counted yet. Tonight we are going to begin, slowly and gently, to put some of it down. Number 5. What you are actually holding when you cannot let go. When people talk about not being able to let go, they almost always mean a specific person, a relationship that ended, someone who left or was lost or simply drifted away. And yes, that kind of letting go is real, and it matters, and we will get to it. But Jung understood that the difficulty of letting go almost always goes deeper than the specific person or situation that seems to be the object of the holding. What you are holding underneath the person, underneath the situation, is almost always something more interior than that. A belief, an image, a version of yourself that the person or the situation made possible, or an unfinished emotional story that has not yet been allowed to reach its ending. When you cannot let go of someone, you are rarely only holding the person. You are holding the version of yourself that existed in relation to them, the you that was capable of that particular kind of love. The you that was chosen by them, or needed by them, or seen by them in a specific way. You are holding the feeling of being wanted, of being relevant, of mattering to someone in the particular way that this specific connection made mattering feel. And when the connection ends, it is not only the person you lose, it is access to that version of yourself, that particular quality of aliveness. And the holding on is very often the psyche's attempt to preserve access to what felt real, what felt alive, what felt like the most genuine version of the self in the context of that connection. I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Karen. She had been trying to let go of a relationship for 3 years, not a recent relationship. One that had ended 3 years ago and that she had thought about, in one form or another, almost every single day since. She had done everything the conventional wisdom suggests. She had talked about it in therapy. She had journaled about it. She had told herself she deserved better. She had unfollowed him on social media. She had been on dates. None of it had worked. Not in the way that she needed it to work. Not in the deep interior place where the holding was actually happening. When she began doing genuine interior work, she discovered something that surprised her. She was not holding him. Not exactly. She was holding the version of herself that had existed during that relationship. A version that had felt more alive, more present, more genuinely herself than anything she had managed to access before or since. When she was with him, she had been funnier than she usually let herself be. More direct, more willing to take up space, more comfortable in her own skin. And when the relationship ended, she had not only lost him, she had lost access to that version of herself. And what she had been trying to hold on to for 3 years was not the person but the aliveness. The particular quality of being genuinely present that she had somehow been able to access in his company, but that she had no idea how to access on her own. Jung wrote, "The most important question anyone can ask is, what myth am I living?" And the myth Karen had been living was this, that her most alive self was only available in the context of that specific connection, that the aliveness belonged to him rather than to her, that without the relationship, she would return to the slightly diminished, slightly managed, slightly less real version of herself that she had been before it, and so she could not let go. Because letting go felt like agreeing to go back to being less than she had been, less alive, less present, less genuinely herself. The real work for Karen was not learning to let go of him. It was learning to access the aliveness directly, to understand that what she had been able to feel in his company was hers, had always been hers. He had simply been the context in which she had first allowed herself to feel it. And once she understood that, once she began the work of accessing that aliveness through the interior rather than through the exterior of another person's company, the holding began to release. Not because she stopped caring about what had been lost, but because she no longer needed to hold the connection in order to hold the self that the connection had made available. This is what genuine letting go actually requires. Not the suppression of feeling, not the performance of being over something, not the convincing yourself that it was not as significant as it felt, but the interior work of understanding what you were actually holding, what the connection was providing that you have not yet learned to provide for yourself, and then, slowly, beginning to develop that capacity. To access the aliveness, the presence, the particular quality of being genuinely real, directly, through the interior, through the relationship with yourself, through the work of genuine self-love that makes it possible, for the first time, to hold yourself in the way you have been reaching for other people to hold you. If you are holding something right now that you have been trying to let go of and cannot, leave a comment below. It does not have to explain itself. It does not have to be fully understood. Just a word or a feeling or an acknowledgement that something is being held, because sometimes The first step toward letting go is simply the honest recognition that the holding is happening, and that is enough. That is already something real. The people inside the inner circle started exactly where you are tonight, tired of the patterns, tired of giving too much, ready to come home to themselves. What changed for them was not one video. It was showing up daily for the interior work. That is what is waiting for you inside. The link is in the description. Number 6. The grief you have not let yourself feel. One of the most important things Jung understood about human psychological life is something that our culture actively works against: the understanding that grief is not a problem to be solved. It is a process to be lived, a necessary, irreplaceable, profoundly human process that has its own timing and its own requirements, and that cannot be rushed or managed or converted into something more comfortable without a significant cost to the interior. When you lose something that mattered, whether it is a person or a relationship or a version of your life that you believed was going to unfold in a particular way, the appropriate response is grief. Full, honest, sometimes overwhelming grief. The kind that moves through you rather than being managed by you. The kind that does not need to be understood or justified or wrapped in a lesson about why it was all for the best. Just the grief itself. The honest acknowledgement that something real has been lost and that the losing of it matters. Most people do not allow themselves this, not fully. They allow a version of it, a controlled, time-limited, socially appropriate version that keeps the grief within bounds that feel manageable. They give themselves permission to be sad for a while, and then they expect themselves to move on. And when the moving on does not happen on schedule, when the grief keeps returning or refusing to fully lift, they treat it as evidence of something wrong with them, a weakness, an inability to heal, a failure of the moving on that was supposed to have happened by now. But the grief that keeps returning, the kind that does not resolve according to any schedule, is almost always unfinished grief. Grief that was not allowed to complete itself. That was cut short by the pressure to be fine, to be strong, to move on, to not be so affected by something that other people seem to handle without the same level of difficulty. And unfinished grief does not go away. It waits, in the interior, in the shadow, and it keeps returning, in different forms and at different moments, until it is finally allowed to complete the process it was trying to complete all along. I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Lynn. She had lost her mother 4 years before she came to this work, and from the outside, she had handled it beautifully. She had managed the practical things that needed managing. She had supported her siblings. She had returned to her life and her work and her relationships within what everyone considered a reasonable time. She had, by all external measures, grieved and moved on. But underneath the moving on, the grief had not completed itself. It had been interrupted too early by the pressure to be strong, to be the one who held things together, to not fall apart when everyone else needed her to be steady. And so it had gone into the shadow, where it had been living for 4 years, influencing her in ways she did not fully recognize. A chronic heaviness that had no clear cause, a difficulty accessing genuine joy, a sense that she was moving through her days at a slight distance from the full feeling of being alive. When she finally allowed herself to actually grieve, not in the managed way but in the full and ungoverned way that grief actually requires, what happened was not what she had been afraid of. She had been afraid that if she opened the grief fully, it would overwhelm her, that she would not be able to function, that the feeling would be too large to survive. But what happened instead was something closer to the opposite. The grief, when it was finally allowed to move through her rather than being held back by her, felt not like drowning but like something releasing. Something that had been compressed for too long finally having enough space. And in the space that the completing of the grief created, something else became available. A quality of presence that had not been accessible while the unfinished grief was taking up all the interior room. A capacity for genuine joy that had been blocked not by the loss itself, but but by the uncompleted grief of the loss. Jung wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And what he meant by this, in the context of grief, is that the attempt to avoid the pain of genuine loss is always more costly than the pain itself. The grief that is not allowed to complete its process does not spare you from suffering. It simply converts the suffering into something more chronic, more diffuse, more interior, the ache that has no clear cause. The flatness that follows even your best moments, the sense that something is always just slightly missing. These are the symptoms of unfinished grief, of the loss that was not fully acknowledged because the acknowledgement felt too dangerous, too overwhelming, too much to ask of a person who was already holding so much. Tonight, as you rest here in the quiet, I want to give you permission to feel whatever is unfinished, not to force anything, not to manufacture emotion or perform grief or produce any particular feeling, but simply to allow what is actually present in the interior to be present. Whatever is held there, whatever has been waiting, whatever grief, however old, has not yet been allowed to complete its process. You are allowed to feel it fully, without needing it to be proportionate or appropriate or finished by any particular time. You are allowed to grieve what you lost and what you never had, and the version of your life that did not unfold the way you believed it would. All of it, without editing, without managing, without the pressure to be already over it. That is not weakness. That is the most honest and courageous thing a human being can do, to feel what is real, to let the interior be as it actually is rather than as it is supposed to be. And in that honesty, in that willingness to let the grief be as large as it actually is, something begins to move, something that has been waiting to move for a very long time. The beginning of the genuine completion, the real letting go, not the performance of it, but the thing itself. Number 7, letting go of who you were supposed to become. There is a particular kind of grief that most people never quite identify as grief because it does not have a clear object. It is not the grief of losing a specific person or a specific relationship. It is something more diffuse and more pervasive, and in many ways more difficult to acknowledge because it requires admitting something that feels uncomfortably close to failure. It is the grief of the unlived life, of the version of yourself that was supposed to exist by now and does not, the career that was going to be different, the relationship that was going to look different, the person you were going to become when you finally figured out what you were supposed to be doing, the life that was somehow always just ahead of where you actually were. Most people carry this grief without recognizing it as grief. They experience it as dissatisfaction, as the persistent, low-level sense that they are somehow behind, that everyone else seems to have figured out something they have missed, that the life they are actually living is somehow not quite the life they were supposed to be living. And they spend enormous amounts of energy trying to close the gap between the life they have and the life they were supposed to have, through achievement, through self-improvement, through the constant updating of goals and timelines and images of what a good enough life is supposed to look like, never quite arriving, never quite closing the gap, never quite finding the point at which the actual life measures up to the imagined one. I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Beth. She was 51 when she first allowed herself to acknowledge this grief directly. She had spent most of her adult life in pursuit of a version of herself that kept moving just ahead of wherever she managed to get. Every achievement, every milestone, every moment that was supposed to feel like arrival produced a brief sense of relief, followed by the return of the familiar feeling that the real thing was still somewhere ahead. She was not depressed exactly, not dissatisfied with specific things exactly, just perpetually oriented toward a future self that never quite arrived, perpetually reaching for something that kept receding. When she finally stopped, when she allowed herself to simply be where she actually was, rather than perpetually measuring the distance between where she was and where she was supposed to be, something very simple and very unexpected happened. She realized that the version of herself she had been reaching for, the one who was supposed to be further along, more together, more clearly arrived, was not something that existed ahead of her. It was something she had constructed from other people's images of what a successful life looked like, from the expectations of her family, from the collective standards of her culture, from the accumulated pressure of a lifetime of measuring herself against benchmarks that had never actually come from her own interior. The image she had been chasing was not hers, and the grief of not having reached it was not actually grief for something she had lost. It was grief for something she had never wanted in the first place but had spent decades pretending she did. The real grief, the grief underneath the grief, was for all the years that had been spent in pursuit of that external image rather than in genuine contact with her own interior, with what she actually wanted, what actually mattered, what the genuine self, not the performing self, was actually reaching for. Jung wrote, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." And the waking that Jung was describing is exactly what happened for Beth in that moment of stopping. The recognition that the life she had been chasing was a dream, a construction, an external image that had been mistaken for an internal truth, and that the life she was actually living, with all its incompleteness and its divergence from the supposed timeline, and its genuine and specific and completely unrepeatable qualities, was the real thing, was hers, and was enough. Letting go of the supposed version of yourself is one of the most liberating and most grief-filled things a human being can do, because it requires mourning something real, the years that were spent in the chase, the energy that went into the performance of becoming the supposed version, the parts of the actual self that were set aside to make room for the pursuit of the imagined one. All of that is real loss, and it deserves real grief. But on the other side of that grief, something becomes available that was never available during the chase, the actual life, the genuine self, the specific and irreplaceable and completely sufficient reality of who you actually are, not who you were supposed to become, who you already are, right now, in this moment, in this body, in this life, exactly as it is. And that, Jung believed, is the beginning of the real thing, the thing that all the chasing was always trying to find. If you feel the weight of the unlived life, the gap between who you are and who you were supposed to be by now, leave a word in the comments. Just one word that names what it feels like to be where you are rather than where you were supposed to be. Because naming it is always the beginning of being able to put it down. And putting it down, even a little, even just for tonight, is the beginning of something that changes everything. Number 8. How the body holds what the mind refuses to feel. As your breathing continues to slow, as the weight of the day settles more completely into the surface beneath you, I want to bring your attention to something that Jung understood long before modern science had the language to confirm it. The body is not simply the vehicle the mind rides in. It is an intelligence in its own right. A form of knowing that operates below the level of conscious thought and that registers, with extraordinary precision, what the mind has not yet been willing to acknowledge. The tension in the shoulders that appeared years ago and never quite left, the tightness in the chest that arrives without a clear cause, the heaviness in the stomach before certain conversations or certain situations. These are not random physical events. They are the body's record of what has been held, what has been suppressed, what has been waiting in the interior for a quality of attention that would finally allow it to move. When you learn to listen to the body in this way, it becomes one of the most reliable guides to what is actually happening in the interior, beneath the surface of the managed life, before the mind has processed something. Before the words are available, the body already knows. It has already registered the grief that is unfinished, the anger that was suppressed, the need that was hidden, the genuine feeling that the persona converted into something more acceptable. All of it is held in the body, in the specific places where the holding lives. I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Jess. She had been in therapy for 2 years and had made genuine progress. She could talk about her patterns with clarity. She could articulate the wound. She could trace the connections between her early experiences and her adult behaviors with precision. But there was one thing that all the talking had not quite reached. A physical sensation in her chest that appeared at certain moments, in certain conversations, in certain situations, and that she had never been able to fully explain or resolve through the thinking. A tightness, a heaviness, something that was not quite pain but that was also not quite not pain. Something that had been there for so long that she had almost stopped noticing it. When she finally began to work with the body directly, when she turned her attention toward the sensation rather than away from it, and allowed herself to simply be with it without immediately trying to analyze or understand or resolve it, something happened that she had not expected. The sensation began to speak, not in words, but in images, in feelings, in a quality of knowing that arrived not through the thinking mind but through the body itself. What it communicated, held in that tightness in the chest, was grief, old grief. The grief of a younger version of her who had needed something she had not received and who had learned, very early, that the needing was inconvenient and the grief was too much, and the safest thing was to make it quiet and keep it there. When Jess allowed herself to feel that grief, fully and without the management, the tightness began to ease, not all at once, not permanently, but enough that she could feel the difference. Enough that the space where the tightness had been holding began to feel, for the first time in memory, like space, like room, like the possibility of something other than the holding. Jung believed that psychological transformation must be embodied to be real, that insight alone, however profound, is not sufficient, that the knowing must reach the body, must move through the nervous system, must be felt as well as understood, and the body, which has been faithful in its holding of everything the mind has refused to feel, is always ready for this. It has been waiting, with the same patience that the shadow has been waiting, with the same faithfulness that the genuine self has been waiting, for the quality of attention that says, I know you are here. I am not going to rush you. I am not going to manage you into something more comfortable. I am going to be here with you, for as long as it takes, until what has been held can finally, gently, begin to release. So as you rest here tonight, as your body grows heavier, and the thoughts grow softer, and the world outside this moment grows quieter, bring your attention to the body, not to analyze, not to fix, just to feel. Is there a place that is holding something? A tension, a weight, a tightness that has been there so long you have almost stopped noticing it. Let your attention rest there, gently, without demand. Simply present with what is there. And if something begins to move, if something begins to surface or soften or release, let it. You do not need to understand it. You do not need to know what it is, or where it came from, or what it means. You only need to let it be here, in the attention, in the warmth of being seen, in the gentle, extraordinary mercy of finally being allowed to exist exactly as it is. That is the beginning of the body's healing, and the body's healing is always the beginning of everything else. Feel yourself sinking even deeper now. The heaviness in your limbs, the softening behind your eyes, the way the thoughts are beginning to lose their edges, becoming less sharp, less insistent, more like clouds passing through a sky that is gradually growing still. You don't have to hold any of this in your mind. You don't have to remember where we are or what comes next. Your unconscious is absorbing everything it needs. Your soul is doing the work that words can only point toward. All you need to do is stay here, in the quiet, in the dark, in the extraordinary, ordinary peace of a body that is finally being allowed to rest. And as you rest, I want to take you somewhere. Not a dramatic place, not a place that requires any effort to reach, just a little deeper into the interior. into the territory that lies beneath all the things we have been exploring tonight. Beneath the giving too much, and the holding on and the grief, and the body's long, faithful record of everything the mind refused to feel. Beneath all of that, there is something else, something quieter, something that has been present through all of it, not suffering, not wounded, not trying to manage or perform or get anything right, just present, just real, just waiting, with the most extraordinary patience, for the rest of it to finally go, still enough that it can be heard. Jung called this the self, the deepest center of the psyche, the part that exists beneath the ego and the persona and the shadow, the part that was there before any of the shaping began, and that remains unchanged and undiminished through all the years of the shaping. And tonight, in this quiet, we are getting closer to it than you may have been in a very long time. Number 9. The moment you stop trusting yourself. There is a moment, somewhere in the history of every person who struggles with self-love, when they stopped trusting themselves, not in a dramatic way, not in a single clear event that can be pointed to directly, but in the accumulation of smaller moments, the moments when they reached inward for guidance and found that the guidance they received was not reliable, when they felt something strongly and acted on it, and the action was met with disapproval or ridicule or the withdrawal of love, when they trusted their own perception of a situation and were told, by someone whose opinion mattered enormously, that their perception was wrong, when they said what was true for them and were made to feel that the truth they were carrying was somehow too much, too strange, too inconvenient for the room. Over enough of these moments, a particular conclusion forms in the interior, not consciously, not as a decision, but as a felt sense that gradually hardens into something closer to a conviction. My own inner knowing is not reliable. The signals I receive from my own interior cannot be trusted. When I feel something strongly, I should check it against what other people feel before I act on it. When I perceive something clearly, I should verify it with someone else's perception before I allow myself to believe it. My own interior is not a trustworthy guide to my own life. And from that conclusion, the reaching outward begins. The constant checking, the seeking of validation before moving, the inability to make decisions without an extended consultation with other people's opinions. The way other people's responses become the primary source of information about whether you are okay, whether you are right, whether you are heading in the right direction. Not because you are weak, because you learned, in a very specific context, that your own interior was not a reliable navigator, and so you outsourced the navigation to other people, to external validation, to the reactions and opinions and responses of the world around you, and called it being considerate, being thoughtful, being the kind of person who values other people's input. I want to tell you about a woman I'll call Dana. She was someone who described herself as deeply indecisive. She could not choose a restaurant without polling everyone at the table. She could not make a professional decision without extended consultation with at least 3 people whose judgment she trusted more than her own. She could not end a relationship, even one she knew was wrong, without waiting for the other person to confirm through their behavior that it was indeed wrong. She was not stupid.